If earlier many people thought that this discussion would slowly find its own calm point, turns out that what appears is actually something different. No more noise. No sooner. But it feels deeper. Because for the first time, part of the public began to stop seeing all this as a separate collection of moments. They begin to see it as a plot. And since that point, the way people follow everything starts to change. It was simple at first. One discussion gave rise to another. Then one interpretation opens the next. There is no point that can really be called the beginning of a new explosion. But there's also no point feeling like a cover. And that's where the flavor comes from that starts to be talked about a lot. Why does it feel like everything is still going on? Though at a glance, there's not always something big going on. But strangely, the attention is still there. Not as a wave, but like a stream. Calm down, but keep moving. And when people start to notice that pattern, a question arises that slowly becomes the center of all discussions. What exactly is being defended? What is attention? Does it feel close? What are habits? Or simply because the public is not ready to perceive this phase as something completed? That question sounds simple. But the more thought, it's getting harder to answer. Because not everyone follows for the same reason. Some follow because of the works. Some follow because of travel. There are those who follow because they have been in the story for too long. And there are those who cannot even explain the reasons themselves. They just know. They're still coming back. Still reading. Still paying attention. And from there comes another thought. What if what lasts for this long is not an expectation, but the connection with the already formed rhythm? Because the longer a person follows something, the less likely they are to only come for one moment. They're getting used to the plot. With a pause. With a change of direction. And unconsciously, what they follow is no longer the case. But travel. At that point, the mood began to change again. It's no longer so much about what's next, but about why it feels unfinished. Even people who try to look at everything more simply begin to admit one thing. There is something that makes this discussion last longer than expected. Not because there is always a trigger, but because there is always a small reason to return. And that little reason, when collected, slowly becoming something much bigger. Then came a pretty interesting thought. What if what makes everything feel long is not because of the time, but because there is no moment that completely disconnects that attention? Because usually, after one phase is completed, the public is moving. But this time it felt like the public didn't go. They just move the way they follow. From waiting, be observant. From searching, become reread. And from wishing, be trying to understand. That little change changed the whole atmosphere. Because now, even when nothing has changed in a big way, still feels like something is moving. And when that feeling comes, people began to stop counting the days. They began to pay attention to the direction. They began to ask, if later everything is already visible more clearly, what part will make us realize that the change has actually begun long before? That question has no answer. But maybe that's not the goal. Because the longer this discussion goes on, it is increasingly seen that what makes him live is not certainty, but rather a space to continue interpreting, space to continue connecting, space to continue to feel that there is still the next page. And as long as that space is there, the story will still feel moving. Not because there's always something new, but because not everyone feels finished following him. Maybe later, when everything is calmer, people will look back and say, the most interesting thing was not when everyone was talking, but when not much happens, but no one really left. And maybe, that's where everything changes unnoticed. And perhaps precisely because there is no point that really feels like a new beginning. The public began to notice something that had not been paid much attention to before. That there are stories that do not develop because of one big moment, but because many small moments never really stop. Thinking is slow, but the effect is great. Because suddenly, people began to re-look at everything in a different way. Not looking for surprises, not looking for clues, but trying to understand how this atmosphere could last so long. And the more thought, the more interesting the result. Because it turns out that many people do not return for the same reason. Some come back because of familiarity. Some come back because the work still feels close. Some come back out of curiosity. And there are those who return only because they feel that they are not ready to close that page. All those reasons sound different, but the direction is the same. They stayed. It was at this point that the atmosphere began to feel more unusual, because usually the public's attention moves quickly. But now, it doesn't look like an explosion, rather endurance. And when something survives, people began to ask not only about what was happening, but why did it happen? Then imperceptibly, the discussion began to shift again. Not anymore. What's next? But why does it feel alive? The question may sound simple, but the longer thought, it's getting harder to answer. Because not everything that survives needs a big reason. Sometimes something remains only because enough people have not finished with it. And maybe that's how it's starting to feel now. Not a sense of waiting, but the taste is not finished yet. Not because of a promise, not because there are signs, but because the rhythm doesn't feel like a cover yet. In the midst of all that, there is also a pretty interesting point of view. What if all this time the public is too focused on events, when in fact forming relationships is sustainability? Because if you think about it again, many things that people remember are not because they are the greatest, but because it is most consistently present at different times. And when that pattern begins to be realized, the way people follow has also changed. They are no longer always looking for something spectacular. Sometimes they just want to know, is that direction still running? And as long as the question doesn't feel like it's over, the attention remains. Interestingly, the longer this atmosphere lasts, fewer and fewer people are trying to predict. They begin to accept that perhaps not all phases should be understood while they are taking place. Sometimes the meaning of a new phase is felt when everything is already past. The thought made the mood change again, become calmer, but also deeper. Because now people are starting to realize, perhaps what they are following is not a single event, but small changes are moving plans. And such changes are often hard to see while they're happening. I felt it when I looked back. Then comes one pretty interesting question. If someday everything returns to a different rhythm, will the public see this as a break? Or will you realize that there is never a break at all? Because the longer people follow, the more blurred the boundaries between present and absent. Not because everything is the same, but because the form of its presence changes. And maybe that is what many people are now learning unknowingly. That in the present era, something doesn't have to be constantly in sight to still feel close. Something doesn't have to be constantly crowded to stay alive. And things don't have to move fast to have direction. Because sometimes, what makes a story last is not how big the moment is, but how long people still want to go to the next page. And so far, the page doesn't seem to have actually closed yet. There's still room. There is still curiosity. There are still small conversations that keep popping up. And as long as it still exists, even the quietest phase can feel like you're on your way to something. Not because there are answers, but because the public has not stopped looking for ways to understand it. Sparkles, and after all the discussion it goes longer. There began to appear one feeling that was not previously talked about very often. Not curiosity, not enthusiastic, but something quieter. Awareness. The realization that maybe what's happening now doesn't always need to be explained by numbers, projects, or big moments.